Leslie Powers from AliveThrive.life, and I am here with part 4 of my Alive and Thriving Foundational series. And today we're going to get into some interesting stuff. So stay tuned. I'm going to share my screen with you and get started. There you go. Awaken your true human potential by taking responsibility for your personal psychology, lifestyle choices, and holistic health. Claim your sovereign freedom and free your soul as you are guided by natural law and right moral action. So this is for folks who are on the path of awakening and really willing to look within themselves and do their own personal work. We are doing this work, the one great work, to help address the resistance that people have for change, which ultimately results in the enslavement of humanity. It is meant to empower and free you and learn the tools to make that happen. So here in part 4, we're going to talk about human programming, psychopathy, empathy, and narcissism, gaslighting, psychic vampires, codependency, psychic self-defense, no masters, no slaves, fear, ignorance and denial, fear of change, an internal monarchy, which we would otherwise call anarchy. So we really want to have a deeper understanding of human nature and how human beings are programmed. What is the human condition? Human beings are ultimately programmable, much like computers. Like a computer, if a human being has a bad file system format, conditions during a child's formative years, a bad operating system, which would be culture, and bad software programs, which equates to erroneous, rigid, and dogmatic beliefs, their output or behavior onto the screen of life will also be bad and will contribute to deteriorating conditions on a mass scale. Like a computer, the behavior of a human being will largely depend upon its programming, the quality of the information put into it, which enables it to process and create efficiently. So this connects to what we've been talking about already in parts 1 through 3, where we looked at the conditions of the world today, which includes a lot of unhappiness, a lot of chaos, a lot of depression, anxiety among massive amounts of people, where people are getting stuck in the rat race or the hamster wheel of survival and not getting close to reaching their full potential spiritually, physically, emotionally, or mentally. This concept of human beings are programmable helps us to understand how this condition, these symptoms in the world have been created. And it also gives us an inroad to how do we change the programming and recognizing that it is an inside job, that we must look at ourselves and understand how we've been programmed. So a simplified way of thinking about this is garbage in, garbage out, quality in, quality out. So as a goal for our humanity, we really want to start to think carefully about how are we formatting our children's minds and how are we, this slide, by the way, comes from Mark Passio. So let's talk a little more about human nature. Human nature, again, is programmable. In general, babies are born with a vast potential, along with biological needs and drives. Yet the innocence of a newborn baby is vulnerable to the forces it encounters and is shaped by its caregivers, good or bad. What happens to a child in the first 5 years of life is extremely important to the development of his or her capacity to experience empathy and to relate to other human beings in a healthy or moral way. Neglect and abuse in the first 5 years of a child's life has deep and lasting negative impacts. Sometimes damage occurs in utero that is difficult, if not impossible, to change after birth, such as through substance abuse and pregnancy. You could also look at the work of Donna Gates, who has a program called Body Ecology, who talks about candida in pregnant mothers and how that may be correlated to children born with autism. So we could look into the work of Bruce Lipton and epigenetics to understand more about this interaction between our genetic disposition and the potential for repair. Genetic alterations or defects could damage the part of the brain that has the capacity to develop empathy, and this could lead to primary psychopathy or a broken brain. There is also some research on mirror neurons, which helps us to understand how we have an anatomy that allows us to develop an empathic connection with other people and greatly impact our ability to understand how others think and feel and to care. We have an interaction in our neural system with other people when we interact with them that goes two ways. Minds can be hijacked, though, through systematic use of trauma and mental or emotional programming, from mild PTSD or accumulation of smaller traumas to severe PTSD, complex PTSD, or severe dissociative identity disorder. Psychopaths among us. A quote by Mark Passio states, "Psychopaths find ways to put wedges between people." A psychopath is a mentally unstable person, especially a person having an egocentric and antisocial personality marked by a lack of remorse for one's actions, an absence of empathy for others, and often display criminal tendencies. This is a definition from the Merriam-Webster Dictionary. Psychopaths do not respond to punishment, apprehension, stress, or disapproval. There's clearly something different about their brain and their operating system internally. They seem to be able to inhibit their antisocial impulses most of the time, not because of conscience, but because it suits their purpose at the time. Words do not seem to have the same meaning for them as they do for us. People can likely be born as primary psychopaths. Most others are shaped into secondary psychopaths due to neglect and trauma, usually from childhood. Breaks in the attachments of relationships combined with repetitive trauma severely hinders a child's development. Outcomes for treatment and rehabilitation are not particularly promising for people with this extreme level of psychopathy. Secondary psychopaths are more likely to be stress reactive, and their dysfunction is often secondary to another disorder or circumstance. They are more responsive to therapeutic rehabilitation depending on the person's recognition and desire for change. Don't judge others by your own consciousness. This is a really important point. Laura Eisenhower states, "Evil is cunning and genius. Love has innocence, seeks harmony and peace. It is vulnerable to getting played and duped. It has had to learn how evil masterminds its dark agendas in order to overthrow it. Love has had to wander into the darkest of underworlds to know how." This quote has a couple of really important points. One is that we have to be aware that not everyone thinks and feels like we do. And that for people who experience the innocence of love and seeks harmony and peace, we often assume that others feel the same and want the same. But there is a subset of our humanity that doesn't think or feel like that at all, that they're operating devoid of those empathic feelings and have negative agendas or very self-serving agendas. And as good people who seek harmony and peace, we really must go into this dark world to understand it to an extent for the sake of knowledge, certainly not to embody that or mimic those behaviors, but to learn about it rather than avoid it. That is how we protect ourselves, is by understanding it and being able to recognize it. So good people are vulnerable to exploitation, manipulation, and betrayal. Evil capitalizes on the good. So for an example, the empath and the narcissist dynamic. I know this is a bit stereotypic. It's popular all over the internet, and I'm not crazy about that, but it will serve it will help to make this point. Because of the general trusting and compassionate nature of empathic people, of empaths, people with narcissistic traits tend to be attracted to them. They're attracted to people with empathy because they can sense a target for exploitation for their personal gain. Most people who we would describe as empaths, people who are sensitive, who are emotional, who think of others' emotions, often put others' emotions before them, which can be a weakness for sure of an empathic person. People who do that often think that that other person is worthy of their trust, that they're equally trusting and compassionate. I've been there in my own life where I've been very naive in a way and trusting and thinking that I'm thinking of them and I wouldn't do something to hurt them, so they wouldn't do that to hurt me. They say they love me. But if you're dealing with a person with strong narcissistic traits, that's not necessarily the case at all. The dynamic could be categorized as one of predator and prey. Empathy can become imbalanced. General empathy means that our hearts go out to another person and what they are experiencing, happy or sad. It's the ability to relate to feel, to relate to another's experience and the feelings that they may have. And we may project that onto people at times inaccurately. Empaths have a natural likelihood to see the good in people and invite them into their lives. Empaths are aware and sensitive to the feeling state and unmet needs of others. They feel things deeply and often see the potential in people to the point of overlooking or excusing certain negative behaviors. Sometimes empathic people absorb others' pain and are more prone to take on the emotional or physical pain of other people. Their gift becomes their vulnerability. Empathic people are vulnerable to becoming prey to psychic vampires or narcissists. Empaths are at risk of developing codependency when their boundaries are weak or consciousness low. Empaths have a hard time even believing in evil. It's hard to even comprehend. So let's talk about narcissism. Most of this information on this slide is from a website called Empathic Healing, Clearing the Path to True You. Narcissism is broadly characterized by a lack of interpersonal awareness, as well as interpersonal antagonism and dysregulated moods. And the core pillars of narcissism are lack of empathy, a sense of entitlement, grandiosity, validation seeking, and emotional dysregulation. There are 8 typical patterns of a narcissist. Similarly, lack of empathy, manipulation of others, projection, lying, poor boundaries, jealousy, gaslighting, and controlling behaviors. Lack of empathy means the lack of interest in or capacity for understanding the feelings and experiences of others. People with primary narcissism may be cognitively capable of empathy, but they do not shape their behavior in accordance with empathy, a point made by Dr. Rumani Durvasula. Narcissists are driven by tangible rewards for themselves or for an externally derived sense of value, importance, or appreciation. They seek to feel powerful or important, seen, acknowledged. That's their food. Narcissists exploit others in order to gain reward for themselves. They have a grandiose sense of self-importance and are self-centered. They are self-serving, and they feel generally superior to others. You may have some people coming to your mind right now that meet this criteria. They're not uncommon. Abusers withhold or misuse information by various means to create a power differential. So when we're talking about narcissists, people with heavy narcissism, these are the people that often become abusive towards other people because they're not really caring about how you feel or how their behavior is impacting you. Oppression comes from a power and knowledge differential. Knowledge of the functionality, behavior, motivations, drive, and influence of the mind, psyche, and consciousness empowers one in life. Ignorance of important knowledge is detrimental to survival and well-being. Those who have this knowledge and use it with their dark care have the power to manipulate and control the minds of the confused. Again, this makes the argument for why it's important for all of us, all good people, to understand this pattern and dynamic and to watch out for it. Otherwise, we become the prey. So we'll look at the pyramid, and at the base of the pyramid is the majority, where they are sitting in ignorance of many of these occulted concepts. Most people will focus on appearances. And in this place, there's a high level of confusion around things that are going on in the world. The further that you go up the pyramid, where the fewer and fewer numbers reside at the top, that's where the empowerment lies, is in the knowledge that you gain. And that is also going from unknown to known. And at the top is where understanding resides. And this is right now, unfortunately and sadly, is a minority of people in our world that have the depth of knowledge and to understand the substance of these occulted topics and information, much of which are around psychology and self-knowledge. So let's see what is hidden occulted knowledge. On a minor or micro level, it's the function and behavior of individual consciousness, understanding your own consciousness, understanding yourself. And then on the major or macro level is the natural laws governing the consequences of behavior, the natural laws that are operating in the world that affect all of us. We talked about this a little bit with the law of freedom, where we learned that it is the majority of people that create the state of freedom for all of us, for each individual. And that if we are to really be free, we can't do it alone. My gaining knowledge and learning about information is not enough. I need everyone, as many people as possible, to join me so that we are understanding the knowledge of natural law and the principles and concepts of psychology and individual consciousness. We need to do this together so that we can change the experience in the world for all people, for the aggregate. Again, abusers withhold or misuse information. That is, the withholding of information is the occulting or hiding of information. People will do this by various means in order to create a power differential. However, they can hold that power only if we allow them to, only if we stay ignorant. And these abusers exist at all levels of our experience. Many of us have been in relationships, directly one-on-one in relationships with people who abuse their power, who seek power rather than caring interactions. And then we're experiencing this in the workplace, in schools, in the medical system, and upwards into the government, right? So who displays narcissism in your life? We all have narcissists, or at least people with strong narcissistic traits who impact our lives. We have all been burned by them. Sometimes we meet them face to face, such as in a partner, coworker, or friend. Sometimes they are more distant, such as a CEO of a company or an elected or appointed politician. In each case, we have a choice as to how we respond or interact to their attempts to wield power over our lives. So it may not even feel like we're dealing with a person. We may be dealing with a very nice, very kind, very caring, well-intended person who is in a system that is actually corrupt and causing some harm. But because that person we're interacting with is kind, we don't connect the dots. Those who do not know the danger of wielding power will, before long, be ruled by it. Never forget that. That's a quote from Lanayru, The Legend of Zelda, the Twilight Princess. So, who are the narcissists who wield power in your life? So here's a term I used before called gaslighting. What is it? Gaslighting is a form of psychological manipulation in which a person or a group covertly sows seeds of doubt in a targeted individual or group, making them question their own memory, their own perception or judgment, often evoking in them cognitive dissonance and other changes, including low self-esteem. Cognitive dissonance is when you have thoughts, behaviors, and emotions that are not in sync. They are not congruent. There's a belief that you have taken on that contradicts something else that you know to be true, and you're living with an internal contradiction. That is cognitive dissonance. Using denial, misdirection, contradiction, and misinformation, gaslighting involves attempts to destabilize the victim and delegitimizes the victim's beliefs. Instances can range from the denial by an abuser that previous abusive incidents even occurred, to belittling the victim's emotions and feelings, to the staging of bizarre events by the abuser and the intention of disorienting the victim, creating confusion, creating doubt and insecurity in oneself. So let's talk about this concept of psychic vampirism. The definition from Wiki is a psychic vampire or energy vampire is a creature in folklore said to feed off the life force of other living creatures and can describe a person who gets increased energy around other people but leaves those other people exhausted or drained of energy. Perhaps you've had that experience. To further explain this concept are some quotes by Michael Tsarion from his article, Psychic Self-Defense. Understand that the greatest evil is perpetrated upon the virtuous. It exists and occurs primarily due to the compassion and ignorance of good people unaware of how evil works. Therefore, develop critical and judgmental skills and doubt everything. Observe how you suffer by projecting your own goodness and virtue on others. Learn how your goodness and compassion enslave you to the will of other people. Goodness without boundary is the soil from which evil grows. Really important statement. Goodness without boundary, without limits, is the soil from which evil grows. Another quote by Michael Tsarion. Evil is never defeated with the weapons it deliberately provides its adversaries. Evil people are threatened only by the superior morality and spiritual strength of others. So our job is to develop superior morals and spiritual strength. Those are our superpowers. So what is codependency? Here's another concept that will play into this dynamic, these power and control dynamics and exploitation. Codependency is a behavioral condition in a relationship where one person enables another person's negative behavior or condition. It often involves excessive reliance on the other for approval or a sense of identity. It is a psychological condition or a relationship in which a person is controlled or manipulated by another who is affected with a pathological condition, such as an addiction. So you can start to think about this in your interpersonal relationships. I also want you to start thinking about this as how are you codependent in relationship to the systems that you interact with? Dependence on the needs of or control by another. Think of our dependence on the government or on your employer. Many codependents tolerate being treated without respect, usually due to a root cause of poor self-worth. Eventually, they end up feeling unappreciated, used, or resentful. Have you been there? I've been there. While this dynamic is usually considered in the context of a family relationship, consider how it can also apply to how people interact with a larger system, such as an employer, a medical provider, government institution, or media outlet. We want to look at the micro and the macro, or the correspondences, which again is a hermetic principle. It is part of natural law. Psychic self-defense, again from Michael Tsarion. Some great quotes. First, false love enslaves, whereas true love frees. When you think you're in love, you might be wrong. You might simply be romantically enthralled. You might simply wish to impress mates or ingratiate parents. Watch to see if this love you're in serves to make you wise or foolish in your choices and decisions. Sensitively watch to see if you rise or fall, succeed or fail, feel healthy or unhealthy while in love. Do you drive away good friends or win more of them to your side? Do you receive lucky breaks or less of them? What are the kinds of things that start to happen when you are with a person in relationship? I have some really interesting examples of that, of like some really bad shit starting to happen in my home when I was pretty engulfed in a very toxic relationship with a narcissistic person. Another quote by Michael Tsarion: when it comes to a psychic attack, you most definitely fight fire with fire. Attacks are against your very spirit, so it's up to you to defend yourself with all your spiritual might. Above all, do not send love to your attacker. Do not forgive or forget their abuses. To forgive a single instance of evil is, philosophically speaking, to forgive all evil through time, which is a right you have not been given. This is going to be met with some resistance, I believe, this idea that do not forgive or forget their abuses. Do not send love to your attacker. He's saying really strongly that that is not what is called for here, that that is not the solution. And in fact, it can weaken your own spiritual defense. Understand that pain, sorrow, illness, loss, and conflict are signs that something is off biopsychically. It's not just random. These states occur when body, mind, and world are out of attunement. Body, mind, and world are out of attunement. Contrary to what you have been taught to believe, the imbalance is often not your fault. It is probably caused by the proximity of toxic, spiritually unworked people in your life. Therefore, it is important that you understand the manner in which the influence of other people affects and disaffects your life. We are not separate from the people around us. And if we are not aware of the energetic pulls and pushes of the people around us, we will be influenced. And we must be aware so that we can psychically and spiritually defend and protect ourselves. Find out how much of what you decide upon and want is based on the influence of others. Again, that is a tribute of codependency. Psychologically and emotionally, you need nothing from others. What you require must be brought up and created from within. No masters, no slaves. The morally superior individual refuses to serve a master and also refuses to enslave others. He is careful not to violate the psychic sovereignty of those he cares for, and is equally careful to own his ground and not be violated in the name of love or duty. Another quote by Michael Tsarian from Psychic Self-Defense. So what he's saying here is that we must be true to morality, to the principles that guide us as individuals, and hold true to them, not hold true to a false loyalty to others in the name of love or duty, because that can be a recipe for disaster if we are dealing with someone who is narcissistic, who is psychopathic, who is out for their own benefit, they're self-serving, and they're not looking out for the benefit of all. Okay. And a person who operates from principle with morality in mind will not violate the psychic sovereignty of other people. We will honor everyone's right to their own psychic and energetic space. We'll honor their right to privacy, to their body sovereignty, okay? And people who act otherwise are operating from evil. Mark Passio quoted once, "The creator of the universe is the only legitimate authority of this earth." The creator of the universe is the only legitimate authority of this earth. So cut the strings of that which unconsciously controls you. Cut the strings from those thoughts, those people or systems, which are unconsciously controlling you. And reclaim your sovereignty, your internal monarchy. But that's scary. For sure it is. It's scary. Wow, cut the strings from the systems that we're depending on, and sometimes the people that we're depending on. And fear is the mind killer. We have conscious fears and we have unconscious fears. But either way, fear leads to contraction. Contraction of our mind results in fight, flight, or freeze responses. These are stress responses or trauma responses. Unprocessed traumatic events create a long and sometimes invisible cord that can be activated by events with a similar feeling profile. This can propel us into an irrational triggering of a fear state. Fear knocks our frontal lobes offline. Our neocortex, our frontal lobes, are what makes human beings stand apart from other animals. So we are not just animals. We are uniquely human with uniquely human potential because we have this complex neocortex that allows us to think and feel and intuit at deeper levels, at more complex levels than other animals. We have the ability to be a witness to our own minds and to see the patterns in the world in ways that other animals most likely do not. Fear, though, can lead to a loss of critical thinking and a loss of compassion or care. Trauma creates symptoms, often much more than memories. So that means that there often is an unconsciousness to how trauma has affected us in our thoughts, behaviors, habits and patterns. We don't always consciously know why we are being triggered. We blend, we mesh with our fear, with our triggering response. It becomes us to some degree when we're not conscious of it happening or how and why it's happening. Fear is the opposite of love. Fear diminishes love. Triggered in fear, we may not feel safe. We may not feel safe enough to love at all. We're more likely to act in solely self-serving or extremely self-protective ways. And often we narrow down our sphere, we narrow our life. Fear can lead us to self-doubt. In fear, we may be propelled to seek safety from an outside source. In this case, we abdicate our personal responsibility to some degree and become something like a child that looks outward for a mother or a father figure to save us, to help us or protect us, a savior. We become prone to create or rely on authority figures, agencies, experts, enforcers, to give us the feeling of safety and security. Does this sound familiar? People and systems which seek control or ego boosts rely on this dynamic and step in to usurp and often abuse their authority. So this feeling of safety, when we deflect responsibility outward, is actually an illusion. So again, we may develop a feeling of safety, but it's false. If we are deferring our decision-making to an external source, an authority of some type, we're giving up our responsibility to make our own choices and to think critically. And that's honestly not a valid choice for us. We all ultimately are responsible for our decisions, whether we want to be or not. If we try to delegate our decision to someone else and let them do it for us, that's a decision that still has consequences. There's still a responsibility for the outcome. So feelings of helplessness, powerlessness increase along with feelings of anxiety and depression. One of the defining symptoms of depression is a feeling of hopelessness or helplessness and powerlessness. When we're in a state of prolonged fear, we can often be subject to depression, which can blur our thinking and lead to those cognitive distortions we talked about in previous episode. And this deferral of responsibility can result in us choosing ignorance or denial. Philosopher Soren Kierkegaard stated, "There are two ways to be fooled. One is to believe what isn't true. The other is to refuse to accept what is true." If we refuse to believe what is true, we are in denial. If we refuse to accept reality, we are in denial. If we believe what is not true, we are being ignorant. We are ignoring the truth. They're very similar concepts. Those are defenses. So now I ask you to think of, what are you afraid of? Where has fear taken over some parts of your mind and led to you living in a state of ignorance or denial? What are you afraid of? What triggers fear or anxiety in you? What's your worst nightmare? What are you afraid of losing? What halts you in your tracks? What gets in the way of your forward progress? What causes you to retreat or hide, to freeze, or to fight? What causes you to doubt yourself? Think about how you might want to make some changes in your life to be less dependent on external power structures, to gain more self-reliance and independence, more sovereignty. And what are the fears that come up when you think about what that will take? It's very real. Our goal here is to conquer our fears, right? To overcome fear and replace it with the spirit of love and purpose. So there are consequences to changing yourself. Even change for good has consequences. And as I'm talking here about detaching and disconnecting from external authorities and encouraging you to start taking more responsibility for yourself and your choices in every aspect of your life, and saying no to controlling people in your lives, the narcissists and the psychopaths and the systems run by them. I want you to think about these consequences and, you know, the fear and anxiety that comes up, because with this, yes, there are consequences of loss. You may lose people, money, jobs, friends, security, familiar things, familiar habits. You may need to give up your addictions. And sometimes, you know, we resist because we don't want to give up. We don't want to lose a friend. We don't want to miss a holiday with a family member, for example. And yet, I'm encouraging you to be willing to be fearless and go forward in the name of principle for a higher purpose, because we're at a crossroads in our lives right now where our decisions really do matter, and our decisions will have an impact on humanity and the aggregate experience for all people. And remind yourself that change can also open you up to amazing things. You will gain new friends, an intrinsic wealth, peace of mind, true freedom, better health, and the opportunity to live, to step into your unlimited potential. When we look at nature, when we look at the elements of nature and earth and spirit around us, we can see there's a great abundance. And our fear of poverty, our fear of lack, really is a straitjacket. And it is based in illusion, the illusion of this false paradigm that we've been given. And that there's a true, real prosperity and abundance waiting for us when we can be courageous enough to step forward in a life based on principle and personal responsibility. So let's talk a little bit more about our conflicts and disconnections. We face many types of conflicts as we go forward in our personal work. Conflict within oneself or internal confusion. We face the cognitive dissonance, the contradictions in our own lives, and that's uncomfortable. Conflict with others, with our parents, spouses, children. When we start to change and awaken and think differently and speak up and make decisions that affect those around us, you know, giving up a job, changing our employment, etc., we're going to very likely have some conflicts with those people that liked what we were doing, reaping the benefits of our paycheck or whatever it is. We may have conflicts with external systems, external forces, our employers, with the school system, with regulations that have been in place attempting to regulate us and control us. We become aware of the obfuscation that has been in place around us, which creates separation. It creates compartmentalization and confusion. we start to see these polarities that are in place that, again, separate and put people at odds with each other, such as the political system of left and right. There's our ancestral and historical trauma that we will start to see how war, extermination of whole cultures and peoples, genocide, witch hunts, etc., and how they are a root cause for many of our internalized fears and phobias, some of our rigidities and closed-mindedness, things that have been passed on through generations that are still energetically within our system. We'll face conflicts around gender roles and gender biases. We'll hear societal messages and judgments and expectations that, again, will put us in conflict with what we know to be right. And then there's survival strategies and getting ahead strategies. There's material survival pressures and needs that we have that are going to put us in conflict with ourselves and our ideals. We're going to be facing these things. The rat race and the hamster wheel, which leads to this brain imbalance, this, kind of shifting from survival to release, to recreate, right? The dialectics and divisions. External powers exploit others by purposefully pitting people against each other, creating conflicts, turmoil, and division. We start to see more and more of that going on in our lives. Addictions are an aspect of internal division and sometimes lead to us acting in ways that we then regret, that are in opposition to our intentions, to our wishes. We may end up hurting people we didn't mean to. Things can get out of hand. And there can be a mental dissociation that we experience from the stress of this cognitive dissonance, from the conflict and disconnection. Happens at all levels. Disconnections within ourself, within our psyche, within our behaviors, between ourselves and the other people in our lives. So here's this little meme. Talk faster. I'm on a landline and I have the feeling we'll soon be disconnected. He's walking out the door, about to break the cord. So we have some hard decisions ahead of us, some conundrums. We have some puzzles to figure out about how do we cope? How do we make decisions with the new knowledge that we're gaining around natural law and seeing the truth in the world, and then seeing all these conflicts and disconnections and feeling them in our own lives. And we have to figure out how we're going to negotiate all this, how we're going to walk the walk. Sometimes I think we all, to some degree, have a fear of freedom. And we need to ask ourselves, where does it come from? Mark Passio has some ideas. And he states that the fear of freedom comes from our refusal to own personal responsibility. We, in some ways, don't want to fully grow up. We want to have an expert, an authority, a system to tell us what to do. How many people go to the doctor to be told what to do, okay? Or go to work and say, just tell me what to do, I'll do it. When we deflect our personal responsibility, again, we can exist in this illusion that we're not responsible, but we are anyway, okay? So we can't refuse to own our personal responsibility. So another reason that people are afraid of freedom, self-loathing, due to a lack of self-respect or a lack of perceived value. So many, many, many people are living with internal cognitive templates that say things like, I'm not good enough, I don't know enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not important enough. That person is better than me. Shame, lots of shame, internalized. Many people are struggling with poor self-esteem, that don't respect themselves, that don't feel valuable and important. And this ultimately is caused by early childhood experiences, traumas, and disconnections in relationships in those primary caregiver relationships. And thirdly, people are afraid of freedom because of those abandonment issues. Abandonment happens in many forms, and often in our early childhood. And it could be abandonment that comes from really what we see as normal things, like parents having to go off to work, two parents that work, parents leaving their babies at 3 months old or younger even, you know, or a parent who has a medical illness and goes to the hospital and there's a separation, or could be parents who have addiction problems, a father that just ducks out. There's all sorts of fairly common ways that parents are abandoning their children. I venture to say that we all have some level of that experience of abandonment in our early lives. And sometimes it can be something like an emotional abandonment, where we're not seen and heard, where our emotions are not given an opportunity to be expressed, where we are being told what to do instead of being understood, right? So these result in feeling states, and freedom can feel and be perceived as a threat to our safety. And we may fear of losing our life, our integrity of ourself. It can feel that extreme, our survival. So in this section, we've talked about a variety of topics that are important for our self-reflection. We need to understand that most of us have been living in a certain degree of ignorance and nescience, which is an actual lack of contact with truth. If we are nescient, that means that we have not had access to the truth. We have not had access to information. This compared to ignorance, which is ignoring the truth, the information that is available to us. And most of us live more in ignorance than nescience because of the internet and our access to so much information, that we have the ability to seek and to find answers, and to understand what's going on around us, and to see the dynamics that are playing out in our lives, and to look at it from a new perspective. This process of awakening involves questioning our thoughts and the automatic beliefs and worldviews that we've taken for granted. It involves looking within to learn about our own fears and the things we cling to and the things we avoid, to ask ourselves, where in my life am I afraid to take personal responsibility? Where do I deflect that and choose to take an easier path of just letting someone else make a decision? Where am I insecure? Where do I dislike myself? Where do I feel shame? Where do I operate with a lack of self-respect? What decisions do I make that actually show that I don't value myself? This brings up the relationships that we have with narcissists, and how we may disrespect our own needs and ignore them to make peace with others, or to make other people happy, or we succumb to the bully because we don't want conflict. So when we talk about empathy as a strength, or empaths as operating from the place of feeling state and care, oftentimes those empaths are also acting without self-respect. That the willingness to tolerate cycles of abuse, willingness to let others make decisions for you or discount your judgment, or to repeatedly discount you in your opinions and your knowledge, is disrespectful to you. And I'm speaking from, my own experience in relationship where I tolerated very unhealthy, toxic dynamics for many years. And I thought I was being good. I thought I was being nice, which is actually, when you look at the root of that word nice, it means foolish. And yes, it is foolish to stay in relationships where you are being treated as less than, as less superior, as unimportant, where your ideas and your knowledge and your wisdom is not valued, where someone is attempting to make you doubt yourself or is abusing you. If you stay in those relationships, that is on you. That's much more about you than it is the abuser. And you take on consequence for that. And that's a steep consequence for yourself, for your own health, physically and mentally, for the health of your children, and what you're teaching your children about their own worth and their own value in the world. We need to understand how our abandonment wounds and our relationship wounds from our childhood or from other relationships in our life, how that has affected us, how it's cut us off, sometimes from feeling, or has us feeling powerless or less than. And we need to start to take responsibility for our own healing so that we can free ourselves from fear and step forward in full sovereignty, knowing ourselves as rightfully free. And together we can support each other on this journey of empowerment and personal sovereignty, and ultimately help create freedom, the state of freedom, the experience of freedom for everyone. Again, this is an inside job. So next time we're going to continue this discussion and start to blend together these concepts of natural law with psychological principles and your own self-healing and self-growth. Thank you very much for listening. My website is alivethrive.life. Released from trauma, guided by principles, empowered by freedom. I do offer coaching. If you are interested, you can reach me from my website, alivethrive.life. I'll work with you on a sliding scale and help you in a variety of ways. Thank you very much. Hey guys, I thought I would add this little screen for such occasions as that shaking, jangly sound in the background, or the snoring sounds that you will frequently hear throughout my presentations and videos, because these two sweet babies are in my room with me almost all the time I'm working. So when you hear the snores, that's Hurley. Very occasionally, rarely will you hear Sam snoring, occasionally a little rough, or some other kinds of background sounds. So I thought I'd give you some pictures and answer the question of who's snoring in the background. All right.
Hello, this is Chris Jansen. Welcome to the End Evil podcast.
It was a crazy year, 2020. I think everybody kind of was losing their mind one way or another. But if you're listening to this, you made it through.
And they're making mistakes, and people are starting to awake.
There is a science of human freedom.
It's also a spiritual journey.
A person under hypnosis will start to see that there's something wrong. Something is wrong.
It's great that you know what you've come to know, but until there's an outlet for that information and you start creating and putting your creations out into the world to teach other people so that they can become as knowledgeable as you.
Life. What is encouraging life is good. That which takes away from life and growth and creativity is not good.